All right, guys, this is something that I don't know how surprising this is, to be honest, but let's go through it. I'll give you the specifics, and then we'll break it down here. But The Hill says 6 in 10 Trump voters agree with core tenet of the Great Replacement theory, according to a survey. So, they say more than 60% of Americans who voted for former President Trump agree with the core tenet of the Great Replacement theory, according to a new Yahoo News YouGov poll. The poll published on Tuesday found that 61% of Trump supporters agree with the statement that a group of people in this country are trying to replace native-born Americans with immigrants and people of color who share their political views. 22% of Trump supporters surveyed said they disagreed with the conspiracy theory. Meanwhile, 16% of respondents who voted for President Biden said they agree with the statement, while 71% said otherwise. 73%, random ad annoying the shit out of me right here, 73% of Trump supporters agreed with the statement that there is discrimination against white people in the U.S., and 18% disagreed, compared with 20% of Biden supporters who agreed and 74% who disagreed. I would have loved for them to be more specific. Like, what do you mean? Define discrimination against white people. I would have loved it if they gave them more specific things to respond to. But just as opposed to the general idea of, is there discrimination against white people? 69% of respondents who voted for Trump said that they are concerned U.S.-born citizens are losing economic, political, and cultural influence in the country to immigrants. While 30% of those who voted for Biden agreed with that statement, the poll said. The new poll comes a week after the massacre at a Tops Friendly Markets location in Buffalo, New York, that resulted in the deaths of 10 people and injuries to 3 others. Okay, so these numbers are wild. So 61% agree with the statement, a group of people in this country are trying to replace native-born Americans with immigrants and people of color who share their political views. This is classic. You know who the problem is? The problem is the immigrant with darker skin who is the source of all your problems. It's the zero-sum thinking of like, there's only so many resources to go around, and the government is gonna side with people who just crossed the border, and they're gonna leave you out high and dry. That's the mindset. And honestly, this number, I think the second number was even worse. Where's that second number? 69% of respondents who voted for Trump said that they are concerned U.S.-born citizens are losing economic, political, and cultural influence in the country to immigrants. So the oldest trick in the book is to divide the working class, make them turn on each other, and then the wealthy run out the back door with all the money and the influence and the power. And that's exactly what this is. 69% of Trump voters saying they are concerned that U.S.-born citizens are losing economic, political, and cultural influence in the country to immigrants. Let me explain something to you. Immigrants, by and large, have very little to no political power. They do not have a lot of money. They do not have a lot of influence. They do not have a lot of power. And so to take a conservative white individual and craft the narrative that this is who you need to hate, that would be people punching sideways or punching downwards. When in reality, what the elites fear is people of all different races, religions, persuasions, and creeds holding hands in solidarity and working together to get a piece of the pie for all of the working class. And so this just shows, man, like, that propaganda has worked. It's worked for years and years and years. When Fox News and Republican politicians have sufficiently demonized and dehumanized immigrants and people of color, white, middle class, lower middle class, and poor people start to look at them as the source of their problems. And it's just not the case, man. I mean, I'm reminded of that Rand Corporation study where they found that the top fraction of the top 1% effectively stole $47 trillion from the bottom 90% of Americans. So you want to talk about a real heist. You want to talk about a real rigged system. Well, there it is right there. And it's not the fault of the immigrant the person of color. It's not. They're just trying to get by and make a decent life for themselves and their family as well. And that is now looked down upon by a certain segment of conservative voters. And so I think the thing that gets me the most is just frustration. It's frustration that this narrative has worked so well in duping conservative voters into blaming immigrants for their problems. When in reality, and this is the most important part, the same policies that would help the immigrants are the same policies that would help conservative middle-class voters. I mean, it would be wonderful if we had a system where you have a right to health care, you have a right to education, including higher education or trade school. You have, Social Security for all, so everybody gets a little bit of money to take care of their material well-being. These policies would help the entire working class. But instead, if those policies are proposed, a lot of conservative, white, middle-class people will oppose those policies just because they don't also want immigrants getting a piece of it. People with darker skin getting a piece of it. And so, nobody's coming to replace anybody. This country is, by its very nature, very diverse. It's a melting pot. You have all different skin colors and all different religions and backgrounds, etc. And so it already is a melting pot. If the numbers in that melting pot go slightly in one direction or another direction, it's immaterial. It doesn't matter. To blame some other person with skin color, for a different skin color for your problems is as arbitrary as blaming somebody with a different eye color for your problems. It just makes no sense. It's just not actually attached to your problems. So it's a shame that this narrative has taken hold, man. It really has. It's a shame that this is something that is a deeply held belief among people. Now, I will say, it's not, a bigoted thing to say, hey, I don't want to outsource jobs out of this country. I want the jobs to stay here. Because I'm sure that, there's going to be some trick from the working class, from the elites, where they say to the working class, well, if you don't want to outsource all these jobs to Bangladesh, then maybe you're just racist. No, you can be in favor of an immigration system that is kind, humane, reasonable, but does have some restrictions. That's not a bigoted position to take. It's not a bigoted position to say we should keep American jobs in America. That's not a bigoted position to take. But my point is, I think the beliefs that are espoused in this poll, these people go further than that. And they truly believe that, dark-skinned people are going to replace light-skinned people, and so the dark-skinned people are the enemy. Again, the idea that they're the enemy is the core of the problem here. Because they're not the enemy. They're in the same boat as you. You have a lot more in common with them than you do with somebody in the top fraction, the top 1%. And that needs to be realized. That needs to be recognized. Anyway, there's a little more here, but it doesn't seem like it's relevant to the heart of the story. So 61% agree with a core tenet of the Great Replacement Theory. And look, I'd be lying to you guys if I said it wasn't going to take a lot of work to move people off that position. But you got to get to work on trying to de-brainwash people on this front, because that rock goes deep, and they've been pounded with propaganda for decades and decades that have led them to this conclusion. So it's time to try to work that out and present a better narrative. And this is why Bernie was so appealing, is that he was the first Democrat in a long time who came along and said, okay, so the right has their narrative. It's xenophobia, it's bigotry, it's blame poor people, immigrants, people of color for your problem, middle-class white person. That was their narrative. Well, we have a better narrative. The narrative is, and it's accurate, the top 1% has rigged the economy. Corporations and billionaires have rigged the economy. They've rigged the tax laws. They've biased the system in their favor, and all working class people are screwed, including people of all different skin tones and belief systems, etc. So that's actually your ally, and you need to unite against the corrupt elites. That's the better narrative. That's the true narrative. And so that should become the dominant narrative, because then we're actually on the path to making positive change once we get a lot of people on that page. So it's just, we gotta shake this sort of primitive thinking. This primitive thinking of like, you know, we're being replaced and it's, these immigrants are getting so much more than we get. A lot of undocumented immigrants can't even use a lot of the social safety net. They can't. So the idea that like they're coming here and they're stealing our stuff, it's not even true. So it's time to get past that and unite the working class so that we can win for all of the working class. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.